On this, the third lecture, we're going to look at lines and shapes. Uh, these are two different elements of design. Both are strictly two-dimensional. Some of the other elements of design are space, color, texture, form, and value. And these are basically the ingredients that an artist uses to make a work of art like a painting or a drawing. So what is a line? Well, we know that it's two-dimensional. It can't be three-dimensional. If it was three-dimensional, it would be a form. So there's basically four definitions of what a line is. The first one is a point in motion. The second is a series of adjacent points. And these are pretty similar, the difference being that a point in motion, that path that the points are on, is usually going to be dynamic. Like here we have this kind of wavy path. A series of adjacent points is usually going to be a straight path. A connection between 2 points, this is the most literal of the four definitions of a line. This is where you have 2 points and you have a literal connection or line that goes from one point to the other. So if you were to get out a piece of paper and just draw a line, that would be the third definition. The fourth one is, it's the trickiest. It's an implied connection between 2 points, or more than 2 points for that matter. In the picture here we have a hand with a pointing finger and then a boy's face, and he's looking in the direction of the finger. So even if we got rid of this black line segment here, you would still have an implied line, because when you see a pointing finger, the eye kind of wants to look in the direction that the finger's pointing. And the same can be said with eyes. I mean, the eyes are clearly looking in this direction. So here we have kind of a metaphorical connection between these 2 points. So here's an example of a point in motion. Geese migrating. Here we have an example of a series of adjacent points, the tops of these bars. As you can see, it's more in a straight path. And we have a connection between 2 points, the literal kind of line. And here is an implied line. And in this picture, there's actually several different implied lines. The most obvious one, and the reason that I put this picture on the PowerPoint, is for the ridge line, where the top of the mountains meet the sky. That creates an implied line. Now here we have several different individual mountains in the picture. This here is a peak. Here's another peak. There's probably a peak over here. There's a peak way back here in the distance, and another mountain over here. So these aren't all on the same physical plane. Some are much closer than others. But when we look at these mountains, our eyes flatten the image out, especially if you're looking at a photo like you're looking at right now. It's purely flat because it's two-dimensional. If we were looking at this picture in real life, if you moved to the right or to the left, you would see more or less of these mountains that are being overlapped by the mountains that are closer. On a picture, like we're looking at right now, it's static. The mountains have been flattened out, so there's no way, if you move your point of view, to see different parts of the mountains in the background. So that creates an implied line, and that implied line is right here along the ridge line. There's not really a line there. If you were up here on this mountain top, the peak of this mountain, there is no line there. But when we look at this picture, a line is formed. You could say the same thing about the shoreline here of this lake. You can say the same thing for this tree line. And notice that the 3 examples I've given all have the word line in their names. ridgeline, shoreline, and tree line. Other implied lines would be things like skylines, like in a city. Okay, so here we have two apparent lines. The top one is clearly a line. It's a connection between 2 points. There's a point right here and a point right here. This is definitely a line. This is where it gets a little trickier because while this looks like a line, this oval, and if you were out somewhere away from school and you were talking to somebody and describing this, you might call it a line, and that would probably be okay. But technically speaking, this is not a line because there is not a starting point or an ending point. It's a continuous, well, I'm contradicting myself by saying it's a continuous line because it's not a line. It's an edge. It's a continuous edge. And so that makes this a shape. You can show movement with lines by overlapping different lines, by making lines curvy, or by simply making them at a slight diagonal, as you can see here. And I'll let you do this on your own, but there are several different lines here that you can see. Some are real and some are implied. So the next element of design is shape. And shape is sometimes confused with form. A shape is some sort of object that's on a flat surface. A form is three-dimensional. So a square is a shape, okay? But a cube is a form. Even though technically you could draw a cube on a flat piece of paper, and it's not a form. It's a drawing of a cube. So it does get a little tricky there. But if it's flat, it's a shape. If you can hold it and move it and see different sides, it's a form. So a shape is an area enclosed on a two-dimensional plane, okay, or picture plane. It can be defined by an edge, which we saw earlier with the oval, a solid color, a texture, a broken color, or sometimes even by other shapes, and those would be implied shapes. And as I just got through talking about, shapes often imitate form, but if they're flat, they're a shape. So here we see shape. Shapes are two-dimensional, forms are three-dimensional. So here we have a shape that's defined by an edge. This red, don't say line because it's not a line, this red edge encloses this area in here, which is a shape. Here we have, it's defined by a solid color, defined by a texture, and here we have actually three shapes. We have one that's defined by a solid color, one that's defined by a texture or pattern, and then this right here, this white area, this is a shape that is created by surrounding shapes. So this is the negative space, this is the positive space, but since they enclose this area, this white area is now a shape. Shapes can appear in a number of different ways, including rectilinear, curvilinear, objective, and non-objective. A rectilinear shape is going to be something like a square. A curvilinear shape is going to be something like a circle. An objective shape is going to be something that is that represents something from real life, an object. That's why it's called objective. It represents an object, which the object could actually be a person. A non-objective shape doesn't represent anything other than just a shape. Some other names for these terms: a rectilinear shape is sometimes called a geometric shape. Curvilinear can be called an organic. Objective and representational both mean the same thing. And non-objective and non-representational, they also mean the same thing. So here we have a curvilinear shape. Actually, we have two curvilinear shapes, a green one and a white one. A rectilinear shape, you can see everything is very squared off, lots of straight edges and straight angles. Here everything is curvy, hence curvilinear. Here we have a non-objective shape. It doesn't really look like anything. And here we have an objective shape, which it is clearly representing something. So that's lines and shapes.